The old mansion loomed against the bruised twilight sky, a skeletal silhouette clawing at the horizon. Its windows were like vacant eyes, watching, waiting. Inside, 7 college friends Haley, Grant, Paxton, Paige, Madeline, Lucas, and Elise sought a weekend of respite from the suffocating pressures of academia. It was Elise's birthday, and she had insisted on a change of scenery, something more adventurous than their usual campus hangouts. They had chosen the Catskills, a region steeped in a history as rich as the surrounding forests, unaware of the darkness that lay dormant within the very ground they treaded. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness as they lugged their bags through the creaking front door, a silence that swallowed even the most casual of whispers. It had been a difficult semester, and this gathering was intended to mend the fractured bonds. Haley and Grant's recent breakup had cast a long shadow over their group dynamic. The air was heavy, strained with unspoken tensions, and filled with the weight of their unspoken words. The mansion, a relic of forgotten grandeur, seemed to exhale the musty scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the meager light filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating cobwebs spun with the patience of centuries. In the basement, amidst piles of discarded furniture and forgotten relics, they discovered a box bound in leather, its surface worn smooth with age. Inside lay a deck of tarot cards, unlike any they had ever seen. The images were not the familiar ones, but a macabre tapestry of haunting figures and unsettling symbols. The cards hummed with a strange energy, a subtle pulse that seemed to vibrate beneath their fingertips. They were compelled, almost hypnotized, by the uncanny allure of the deck. To lighten the mood, and perhaps to distract from their underlying discomfort, Haley, who had a passing interest in astrology, offered to read their horoscopes. The cards felt heavy, cold in her hands. There was no playful banter or light-hearted curiosity. Instead, an unusual solemnity fell upon the group. Elise received the High Priestess, a card depicting a figure of enigmatic power, both alluring and intimidating. Lucas was given the Hermit, an old man shrouded in shadows, seeking solace from the world. Madeline's card was the Hanged Man, a chilling image of sacrifice and suspension. Paige's was the Magician, a figure of cunning and manipulation, holding the world in her palm. Paxton drew the Fool, a figure about to take an unexpected step into the unknown. For Grant, it was the Devil, a symbol of temptation and corruption, leering from the card. As for Haley herself, she drew the dreaded Death card, its skeleton figure sending a chill through her. The reading had been unsettling, the laughter of the group felt forced, and the cards had cast an aura of unease across their weekend retreat. The next day, the mansion's oppressive silence had not abated, and the chilling implications of the reading seemed to linger in the air. The friends decided to return to campus, hoping a change of scenery would dispel the strange foreboding. But the mansion had awakened something, a dormant darkness that now pursued them with relentless malice. The cards had acted as a catalyst, releasing an ancient curse, and the fates that had been foretold had begun to materialize. Elise was the first to fall victim to the tarot's cruel design. Drawn back to the house by an unseen force, she found herself in the attic, a place where shadows danced and time itself seemed to warp. The attic was a stifling space with exposed beams, and the scent of age and decay was far more potent here. It was there that she encountered her nightmare manifested. It was not the benign, veiled figure she had seen on the card, but a monstrous rendition of the High Priestess, her face contorted in an inhuman snarl, her hands gnarled and clawed. The entity attacked Elise with a horrifying ferocity, using the very ladder she had climbed to reach the attic as a deadly weapon. Each blow, each sickening crack of wood against bone, was a step in the dreadful manifestation of her fate, a terrifying validation of the cursed reading. Her screams were cut short, swallowed by the silence of the old house. Lucas's death was equally gruesome, a grotesque parody of the Hermit card's isolation. He found himself pursued by a phantom figure of a hunched and terrifying old man, a reflection of the solitary figure depicted on his card. The figure stalked him mercilessly, a constant shadow in his peripheral vision. The pursuit led him to the deserted and restricted area of the train station, a place where the echoes of the past mingled with the present danger. The creature drove Lucas onto the tracks, a screech of metal on metal as a train barreled towards him, the final sound before he became another victim of the card's macabre game. The realization dawned on the remaining 5 that the tarot cards were not mere curiosities, but instruments of death. The cards had somehow come to life, twisting their fates into a gruesome spectacle of fear and horror. They were caught in a nightmare not of their making, and the walls of their reality had started to melt away, replaced by a cold dread. It was clear they were not simply participants in a game, but victims in a macabre ritual orchestrated by the very cards that had promised to reveal their destiny. Driven by a desperate hope for answers, they turned to the internet, a modern oracle in a world of ancient curses. They discovered Alma Astron, an expert on tarot, a beacon of knowledge in the encroaching darkness. Alma revealed the cards' horrific origin, a history steeped in vengeance and black magic. The cards belonged to an astrologer who, in 1798, had served a Hungarian count. Her visions of the future, once coveted, later violently rejected. The count had sought her predictions of his own future, and the astrologer had warned him that his pregnant wife and child would perish in childbirth. After that prophecy came true, the grief-stricken count sought revenge. He had the astrologer's daughter brutally murdered. Fueled by her grief and fury, the astrologer had not only cursed the count and his friends, but also the deck of cards themselves, before taking her own life. She had imbued them with the very essence of her rage, turning them into instruments of death, each card a promise of a gruesome demise. The deck, she explained, had been responsible for numerous massacres over the years. Alma herself was a survivor of a similar tragedy, her friends having been killed by the same cards. She had been spared only because she had never performed a reading on herself. Her message was clear: the cards had to be destroyed. But the curse had already taken root, and the hand of fate was relentless. While driving back to the Catskills mansion to destroy the cards, their car broke down on a bridge, a desolate stretch of road suspended between two worlds. The breakdown was more than a simple mechanical failure. It was an ambush, a calculated move by the forces that sought to bring them to their doom. Madness gripped Madeline. The weight of her fate, the image of the hanged man, had finally broken her resolve. She fled the car, the panic overwhelming her mind racing with images of the hanging figure, the rope tightening around her throat. Her escape was a desperate act, a futile attempt to outrun the inevitable. She did not find salvation, only her own gruesome end. In the darkness of the night, the spectral manifestation of the hanged man rose from the shadows and executed its gruesome purpose. Paxton, now alone, returned to the campus, hoping to find safety amidst the familiar chaos of student life. But the curse knew no boundaries. It had permeated their world, turning the mundane into a theater of terror. He was stalked by the Fool, a grinning, malevolent figure that seemed to materialize from the very fabric of reality. Paxton found himself trapped in the elevator, the confined space amplifying his terror, the walls closing in like a suffocating coffin. The Fool attacked him relentlessly, its laughter echoing through the elevator shaft, a sound that promised not just death, but also a slow descent into madness. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the remaining three, Haley, Grant, and Page, attempted to destroy the cursed cards. Fire was the most obvious solution, but it refused to take hold, the flames dancing around the cards as if mocking their futile efforts. The cards were protected by something beyond comprehension, some dark magic that defied the natural order. Desperate, they turned to Alma for help, summoning her once more into their nightmare. Alma, heeding their desperate plea, traveled to the mansion. She tried to invoke the spirit of the vengeful astrologer. It was a risky move, a gamble against the forces of the unknown. She believed that she could negotiate, appease the spirit's pain, but she was woefully mistaken. The astrologer's spirit materialized, a wraith of pure rage and despair, her eyes burning with the embers of an ancient vengeance. Before Alma could utter any words, the spirit pulled a card, the Six of Swords, a symbol of travel and a journey into the unknown, a card that was now stained with death. Alma was swiftly dispatched, the power of the cursed deck claiming yet another victim. The magician card had not been idle either. Its power had found a conduit in Page, manipulating her mind and twisting her perception. Page found herself in the basement, drawn into a macabre ritual of obedience. It was as if her mind had become a chessboard, her movements dictated by an unseen hand. The magician had hypnotized her, turning her into a puppet of its cruel design. She hid in a large wooden box, believing it to be her salvation, but it was another step towards her doom. The box became her prison, her coffin, as the magician moved in for the kill. With horrifying precision, the entity sawed the box in half, Page's terrified screams echoing in the cold, unforgiving basement. The magician had claimed its victim, completing the gruesome tableau of the card's deadly game. Only Haley and Grant remained, their resolve teetering on the brink of despair. They were not just fighting for their own survival, but also for the souls of their friends, and against a darkness that threatened to consume them all. Time was running out, the weight of the curse heavy upon them. Haley, haunted by her own death card, came up with a desperate plan. If the cards had been used to seal the fate of others, perhaps they could be used to break the curse itself. She had heard Alma's tales, and had come to believe the only way to defeat the astrologer's curse was to return her own fate back to her. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. She had to confront the source of the curse. Grant, despite the looming figure of the devil that haunted his every step, stood by her. As Grant was dragged away, toward his terrible fate, by the monstrous embodiment of the devil, Haley focused her will and drew upon her courage. Grant, in the clutches of the devil, was a disturbing sight. His eyes wide with panic, his body contorted in a desperate attempt to free himself. It was her turn, and she knew it. In the face of her own terror, she did a reading on the astrologer's spirit. She did not draw a random card. Instead, she summoned the death card, the very card that had been hanging over her head since the very beginning. It was a calculated risk, and a confrontation of her own mortality, an act of defiance against the cards themselves. As she confronted the spirit, she realized that the astrologer's curse was born of grief and a need for vengeance. It was a wound that had festered for centuries, a sorrow that had poisoned the fabric of time. The key to breaking the curse was not just to kill the spirit, but also to acknowledge the pain it represented. And here, at the very heart of this terrifying struggle, Haley found an unexpected solace. She had been carrying the weight of her own grief, her mother's death casting a long shadow over her life, but it was here, surrounded by death, that she learned to accept the ephemeral nature of life. As she faced the astrologer's spirit, she acknowledged the pain of her own loss, and the pain that had driven the astrologer to damn the world. She had, at last, found a measure of peace within the chaos of their struggle, a measure of understanding in the face of their terror. She released the sorrow, and in doing so, released the astrologer's spirit as well. The release of grief created a ripple effect. The curse itself began to unwind. The astrologer's spirit, freed from her eternal torment, started to dissipate, the darkness that had clung to the mansion and the cards beginning to fade away. The cursed deck crumbled into ash, its malevolent power finally extinguished. The nightmare was over, but the scars it left would be forever etched into their minds. The mansion, no longer a prison of terror, seemed to exhale, the air feeling clean and light once more. Grant, bruised and shaken, but alive, returned. He and Haley, survivors of the macabre dance, reconciled, their shared experience having forged an unbreakable bond, one that had been tempered in the fires of the deepest kind of fear. They sought out Paxton, still traumatized by his encounter with the fool. They discovered him in his dorm, the elevator incident having left him a shell of his former self. He had survived because, in a final twist of fate, his roommate had opened the elevator doors, causing the spectral fool to vanish into the ether. It was a moment of grace, a reprieve from the clutches of death, but the trauma of what he had endured remained a heavy burden. The curse was broken, but the world around them had changed. Their innocence had been shattered, replaced by a profound understanding of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of reality. They had stared into the abyss and survived, carrying with them the weight of their experience. The events of that nightmarish weekend would forever haunt them, a reminder of the fragility of life and the power of forces unseen. The world would never seem the same again, their lives forever marked by the curse of the astrologer's deck. They were survivors, but they were also changed, their understanding of the world forever altered by the horrors they had endured. They carried within them the weight of their loss, but also the spark of hope, knowing that even in the face of unimaginable terror, the strength of the human spirit could indeed prevail. They were forever bound by the secret they shared, the terror they had confronted, and the bonds of their shared ordeal.